APIDA month, our virtual roundtable with Jerry Wan. So this event begins with recognition of the land Hamilton College occupies and an affirmation of support for the APIDA community. While we are virtual, we acknowledge we are on stolen land in what is called the United States. We acknowledge the true stewards of this land, the Oneida people, pay respect to their ancestors and current members, past and present. This land acknowledgement is not meant to act as a statement without action. Colonialism is an ongoing process that continues to impact Indigenous, Native American, First Nations, First Peoples, Aboriginal, and American Indians. By residing on this land, we also take part in the way colonialism tries to erase Indigenous traditions and knowledge from our consciousness. We acknowledge both the forced displacement of Indigenous folks and the ways in which they continue to exist and build in land that is no longer recognized as theirs. As settlers on stolen land, it is our duty to not only acknowledge we are on land that doesn't belong to us, but actively work in dismantling these structures that exist inside our minds and externally through governmental structures. As members of Voices of Color lecture series, we acknowledge that the Black liberation struggle cannot be fought without connecting the movement to Indigenous sovereignty. Just as the country we reside in was created on stolen land, displacing and enacting violence against Indigenous peoples, so too was that stolen land used to exploit Black laborers and create the wealth of the United States.
And I'll be reading the APIDA Heritage Month statement. So, the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American, or also known as the acronym APIDA, Heritage Month is a month long celebration and uplifting of Asian Pacific Islander Desi American identities, experiences, histories, and cultures. The Days-Massolo Center, in partnership with the Asian Student Union, supports student created programming that centers on the APIDA experience and aims to inspire confidence, pride, and deepened interest in what it means to move through the world as an APIDA individual. We stand in sorrow and solidarity with Asian and Asian American communities who are facing an escalating series of racist attacks, including last month's horrific attack in Georgia, in which anti-Asian racism, compounded with misogyny, evidently resulted in the murder of 8 people. Anti-Asian racism has been a recurring theme in United States history. Since early in the COVID-19 pandemic, Asian Americans across the country have been targeted by people who were motivated by white supremacist beliefs to blame people of Asian descent for the virus. We condemn these attacks and racist rhetoric that fuels them. As we mourn those who are lost, we also affirm our commitment to becoming a deeply anti racist organization and working with allies towards a more just society.
Cool. So without further ado, let's begin our event by introducing our speaker.
So I'll be introducing Jerry. Jerry One is a storyteller, brand builder, and community leader. He's the founder and CEO of Just Like Media, an Asian American storytelling company whose podcast brands include Dear Asian Americans, MB Asians, The Janchi Show, and Asian Podcast Network, and have partnered with McDonald's, U.S. Census 2020, and U.S. Department of Health and Services. He is a keynote speaker and workshop facilitator and has worked with organizations like Johnson & Johnson, LEK Consulting, Horizon Media, and Pepsi. Jerry speaks on a variety of topics, including authentic storytelling and the Asian American experience in the workplace. Prior to this, he was a senior strategy consultant at Accenture and sales leader at startups and F500 companies. Jerry has a BS from USC Marshall and an MBA from Michigan Ross, where he served as president of the Student Government Association. He has served in board and leadership roles of alumni organizations and community nonprofits. Along with his wife Kyung and his 2 children, Jerry lives in Southern California. Jerry, welcome and thank you for joining the Hamilton College community this evening.
I thank you so much for that warm welcome. Um, I've never actually been a part of any event where what you read, Lily, kicks off the event, and I think it could not be a much more appropriate and much more impactful way to talk what we want to talk about today. Um, because the way that we've been treated, the way that we continue to be treated in this country is one, ridiculous and insane, but two, almost comical because people who just happened to get here first and decided to kill most of the people that were here are now saying this is my place and that you, everybody else who wasn't here or looked like me, should be treated differently. And so I applaud you. To the students, Ginny and Lily, and to Paula, thank you so much for the invitation and also what's been one of the most smooth processes in getting this event planned. I forget the name of the student, but whoever created the cool graphic in the crazy font, thank you. It makes me look cooler. Otherwise, I am a 37-year-old father of two, almost 38, who at one point put a video of himself dressed in a Chewbacca costume on YouTube. It was actually first on LinkedIn, which makes it even more ridiculous. But as you will hear from my story today, some may call it I stopped giving a crap, and I will say that I decided to just be me. And as a consequence, not care what other people think or say about me because I have to live with myself for the rest of my life, and other people's opinions quite don't matter. So, what I want to do with you today, I have a deck to share, and I will go over it, just to level set and so sort of share with you some of the data and the news that we've been seeing. I do want to make this conversational. I love the fact that there are, just a handful of us in here, and so use the chat room. I already see the chat going. If you want to shoot me a question that you don't feel comfortable asking in the broader room, please use the Zoom DM feature. Just click that blue bubble that says everybody, click down to my name, Jerry, and just shoot me a question, and I am happy to address it. And so uh, we don't have to wait until the end to answer questions. But also a part of what I want to do is to share with you a story. You've heard my bio, and if you look at my resume, none of it makes sense. And what I get to do now, which is to share my story about being Asian American, my personal journey, and what it means to be broadly Asian American in this country today, and what it means, especially in the context of being a student and employee, are things that I don't think my parents, and we've been here almost 30 years, could have ever imagined that their immigrant kid would end up doing, particularly after having gone to the schools that embody the spirit of excellence, of meritocracy, of objective success, and who at one point thought, rightfully or wrongfully, that working at certain logos would identify or would be my sole identity as somebody who, quote unquote, has made it and on his way to achieving the American dream. But as I mentioned earlier, I am a father of two, and I care deeply about the world that I leave them. You all here, if you are students, are right in that middle between my kids and me. And not much has changed from a social construct perspective, from a motivational perspective, and from a content perspective of what you have as resources to look up to Asian Americans who do things to change the world for the better. And so, as I thought a few years ago about what the world my kids would grow up into, I found it really unacceptable that I just continued to do things to make a little bit of money while making companies a lot more money and basically living life without much purpose or mission, and to leave the world in a different or very similar condition to my kids. And so, my mission and my story is very selfish. I am doing this for my kids, and you guys get to be along for the ride. And I want you to join me as we share today to learn a little bit more about our culture, our community, and to make a commitment too that regardless of your primary job title, that you'll infuse activism and advocacy into everything that you do, and to try to make a better world for not just for my kids, but your kids. I don't know when you're going to have kids, but if and when you do, we want to have them exist in a place that is far better than the crap hole that we live in today. Because even as we were preparing for this, even just this week in Baltimore, two Korean women, older Korean women, were attacked with a cinder block. Two Chinese American grandmothers were stabbed in the middle of the day on Market Street in San Francisco. And a father of a 1 year old was publicly beaten on a very, very busy corner and a very popular supermarket while his 1 year old son was in a stroller just feet away. I don't even want to go outside. And I'm strong and able to take care of myself. And so we live in crazy times. And so, first and foremost, I want to wish everybody health and safety. I don't know where you are and going to school and where your parents and other family members might be, but check in on them frequently. And while today might signify a really crappy holiday that people wear offensive hats and drink certain liquors and eat certain foods, celebrating a wrong version of a Mexican holiday, I grew up knowing May 5th to be Children's Day in my culture of Korea. And so, since we're all kids, happy Children's Day to everybody. May you never grow up. and may you be completely okay with wearing a Chewbacca costume on LinkedIn one day. So, I'm going to share my screen. I can go as fast or as slow on in this presentation, depending on how much you guys want to chat about certain things. So feel free, please, to stop as I go. But before we get to the actual content, while so many of us are perhaps vaccinated, living in what we consider to be the normal of the past, I myself went back to my very first basketball game yesterday. It was a very surreal experience. There was like 2,000 people in a building that's supposed to pack 20,000. Um, I didn't intend to go. My friend who works for the team had extra tickets, so I went to a Clipper game yesterday, and I sat there thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is a very, very weird, yet very familiar experience." And while so many of us in America are thinking that way, so many of our friends and family members, colleagues who have family members directly in India are not so lucky. And so, as we talk today, as we talk about the things that are impacting the Asian American community and Asians globally, let's not forget to worry about our friends. We all are related of people who are in parts of the country who are still dealing with the insanity of COVID. Um, I just checked the numbers before we jumped on, and it's something like 400,000 cases today. That's probably an incomplete number, given the lack of testing ability, given the lack of resources, and the underreporting that we have far seen too much coming out of certain parts of the world. Um, so how's everybody doing? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Throw it in the comments. Sawa is doing well. Everybody is generally doing well. Okay, hanging in there. Stressed. Grades won't matter after a couple of years, so don't stress too much. Eating for the first time today, Joel. No, it's like it's almost dinner time. All right. I think you guys may have gotten an eye on this deck before because the next question is, well, how are you really doing? And I asked this because I think pre-pandemic, pre all this stuff, we just, would pass each other in the hall or in class or even just with our family and friends and just it was a throwaway question, right? Like, hey, how are you doing? How's it going? And so much so that many times we'd even often respond with the same question, not even answering it. And then how you doing was met with how you doing. And we never really answered and we never really cared to understand how each other were doing. But in these times of COVID and these times of a rise in anti-Asian hate and all that's going on in our community, we care about each other. I think we have been more intentional as we move to a virtual world and we don't have as many just casual conversations or just hanging out for the sake of hanging out. We've been very intentional about how we spend our time. And so we do care about each other. And so, how are you really feeling is something that I think we are asking of each other more often than we thought. And so we asked some friends over on LinkedIn about a month ago how they were really doing as it relates to the anti Asian hate crimes and some of the feelings that they were processing and going through. The context is that this was done in early April, just as we were sort of processing and trying to figure out what do we do after Atlanta. And so, take a moment to read some of these, quotes on the page. And on the bottom, the words that are highlighted in yellow are what I want to take away from this. Is that while it is ugly, people are motivated, emboldened, and mobilized. If I share this page with you, didn't, and I wasn't Asian, and this wasn't APAM, this is exactly what our black friends said 8 months ago. They're scared to go out, they're frightened, they're frustrated, but something about all that's happened has motivated them to do a little bit more. So there's a lot of resonance in what our communities are going through. Obviously, not the same experience, obviously, not collectively. But as mentioned in the preamble, all of our struggles are tied and unified. Um, if you don't know where the term Asian American comes from, you'll soon learn that it is actually tied to the Third World Liberation Front activism for a more equitable educational system. So here's what we're going to talk about for the next 30, 40 minutes. Try to get through it as fast as we can. And if we don't, I'm happy to share, other things after the call so we can continue to learn and to process. But that's me. Those are my people. The people on the far side used to give me presents for Children's Day and they stopped. And now they give the little two tiny people presents for Children's Day because those are my tiny people. And those two people Jacob, I'm holding, and Charlotte's one. That's just why the reason I do anything here. I am here obviously because of my parents and their sacrifice and their dedication to our education. It's just my brother and me here now, and my wife Kyung and our two kids. And again, very selfish. I just want to leave a better place for my kids, and in the process, have a lot of fun. Um, and so, I mean, you guys are probably very well aware, and you guys are obviously here with me on a Wednesday night. And so, I assume that you care, assume that you've paid attention to the news. But anti-Asian hate crimes are real, has been increasing, and it is not new. It's not just the news. Uh, Research organizations and think tanks have also pointed this out. You may have seen these photos circulating around social media, particularly on Instagram. These are visualizations of what people look like, done by my friend Jonathan Chang. And these could be any of our grandparents and perhaps even some of our own parents. And so BJ was out walking. Noelle was going to work. Nancy was picking up cans because her family was that poor that she had to pick up cans in a pandemic. Young tried to break up a fight, and Pac was out just out walking as well. Two of them are dead. These could be our grandparents. None of it makes sense. The data doesn't make any sense either. 145% rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, as noted by the Center for Study of Hate and Extremism. Why does even such a center have to exist in the first place? Why does hate and extremism have to exist so that we have to study it? But here we are. An organization who was born out of the pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, called the Stop AAPI Hate organization, led by Dr. Russell Jung out of San Francisco State, received almost 3,800 instances of hate crimes. For those who understand the Asian culture just a little bit, you'd understand that that number is probably at least 20x that, the real number. We don't talk, we don't report. There's burden, there's guilt, there's shame. There's just nuisance. You don't want to burden your kids. There's a lot of shame in that. So I don't know what the real number is, but it is shocking. And it isn't just physical safety and just emotional safety, it's financial safety too. On the left, you'll see an excerpt from the report from McKinsey that said we, Asian Americans, were more impacted by unemployment in the early parts of 2020 than any other group. You'll see that credit card spend on the right hand side, done by MasterCard, also notes that in Asian neighborhoods in New York City, namely Chinatown, Flushing, and Jackson Heights, suffered more financial damage than all of New York combined. And look at the Manhattan or the Chinatown chart, 82% drop in spending. How do you survive? How do you pay your people? And the government dropped the ball, obviously, and they didn't take care of our people. And so, was it due to COVID? Maybe. Was it due to racism? Maybe. A combination of a whole bunch of other things, poor business planning, lack of reserves, maybe. But it is what it is. It's been an awful time. And people are scared. This is a newer study done by the Pew Research Center. 8 in 10 Asian Americans say violence against Asian Americans is increasing. I want to meet the other 19% of people and have a conversation with them and try to understand what world they're living in, because it should have been 100%. On the right, you'll see that people are scared. They've experienced a lot of atrocities. About a third of people have said they have feared someone might attack or physically attack or threaten them. They're living in fear. But there's one number that I want you to pay attention to here, which is that 32 number and the dark green on the bottom. Someone expressed support for them. Only 32% of Asian Americans surveyed, that 32% have expressed support for them. What's wrong with us? It's not just the allies we can blame, it's us too. Are we checking in on each other? Are we showing support? I know we have a lot going on in our own lives. We got to make money, we got to make grades, we got to take care of our people. But where has humanity gone? And that's the, that's the sad part in all this. And so in early March, on March 11th, the very first time that President Joe Biden got to address the nation since being sworn in, he did mention this for us. He did name it. He called it hate crimes. And he said it was wrong. He said it was un-American. And we all know better than to think that any president or any singular person making these comments makes things go away. It doesn't. But it sure hell beats somebody calling it the China virus and blaming it on people who look like us. And so it was a nice moment. I think this week we were hopeful that things would follow, that policy and law changes and action would follow to really stem it, because in early March, we thought the worst was behind us. Then Atlanta happened. And Atlanta rocked my world, people. It just rocked my world. Um, that report that said 3795 attacks had been reported, that came out the morning of Atlanta. And so there's a lot of conversations in the community with friends about what do we do? We know the numbers are bad. What do we do? What are we going to do? Um, you know, and I think in the middle of March, it was in the middle of Women's Heritage Month. We were thinking about what we were going to do in May, and we were just in this weird sense of, is it as bad as it's going to get? Um, and then we found out about Atlanta. 8 people died, six of them Asian women, many of them older. And then I asked myself, what the hell were 70-year-old people doing working in these jobs to begin with? How did the system fail them? They should have been at home. They should have been with their family, but they were cooking, they were doing dishes, and they were doing laundry to survive in a spa in suburban Atlanta. And just as we were trying to figure out what was going on, a month later, Indianapolis happened. And before I talk about Indianapolis, I don't know about you, but there was a lot more silence after Indianapolis, even within Asian American news outlets, even in people who claim to be an Asian American voice, even people who advocate for Asian American issues, because we also have a lot of internal problems within our own community about how we amplify certain Asian American story versus others. This FedEx processing facility is 90% Sikh American, Punjabi, Indian. The guy knew where he was going. And again, here, if you look at the ages of people who died, they range from 19 to 74. Why do grandparents have to work processing our boxes and our packages? How can we do, not just in terms of stemming hate, but what can we do going forward to make sure that our grandparents, that we, when we age, don't have to do these jobs? A lot of things to consider. And so, covered a lot of heavy things, but I think it was necessary because we have to address the elephant in the room, and that these things are real. So I'm going to share with you a little bit more about our history, and you guys are probably much more well versed and have taken upon yourselves to learn more about these than I did when I was in at your place in life. Though I went to some smarty ass schools, I did not learn much of this, and even when I did, I'll share very shortly. I identified primarily then as a Korean American, and a lot of the things that were happening to other Asian Americans, I othered myself out of the equation. And we also have to think about how our own histories of our home countries, of where we come from or where our parents come from, impact how we view Asian America and how we view other Asian Americans. So let's talk about the Asian American experience. And that asterisk is specific and intentional because it's super duper complex. We can call ourselves any of these. And I highlighted and bolded the one that Hamilton goes by, which is APIDA, which is a newer word. APIDA didn't exist when I was in school or when I was, I don't know, up until a few years ago. But we could be any of these. And I think in an effort to be inclusive, organizations, governments, and other folks continue to come up with new acronyms to try to be as inclusive as possible. The newest one is including NPI and stuff, which the NH stands for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. Um, but it really depends, but the question begs, who do we represent and who should we represent, right? When we talk about uh, in the APIDA acronym, Pacific Islander, why, when they made the what was initially Heritage Week back in '79, include everything west of California into 1 week? Why were we bundled? Is that unique? Is experience the same? It's not. Most of the Pacific Islands are, we call them territories, but they're colonies right now. They don't get to vote. They don't have citizenship. They're just sort of in limbo. They're there as military bases for the United States to fend off major powers, namely China. Back then it was Japan. And so why do we get bundled? And well, how do they feel? I'm not Pacific Islander. They're not a very large part of our population. There's about a million in the United States, less than a third of a percent. And yet, when they declared this week, they said, all right, everybody west of California gets 1 month, figure it out. And then the Desi name is also interesting because it technically shouldn't, it should be included in the Asian part. But there are parts of the Asian American and Asian diaspora who identify differently. We've all heard South Asians referring themselves out of the Asian American conversation. And we've also heard, unfortunately, people who look a lot like me, privileged East Asian dudes, who think that all things Asian American just have to do with people who look like me. I recognize the irony in that because I do look like the person who messes it up for a lot of people. but I'm here to tell you that we need to be as inclusive as possible. But also here to tell you that as I talk about my presentation today, I'm going to be focusing on the Asian American experience as something that is relates to my personal background and where my expertise is. And so, history time. Where did APAM begin? APAM began in the late 70s when Frank Horton gets a lot of the credit. He was a congressman that actually nominated the bill, but it was as one of his staffers whose grandfather helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, staffer last name Jew, uh, who basically said we need to do something to commemorate, Asian Americans in this country. And so, along with Norman Netta, who's a congressman, and if you ever flown through San Jose, that's whom the name airport is named after. Um, Put forth a motion both in the House and the Senate to have what was initially called Pacific Asian American Heritage Week. Got denied. So they tried again 2 years later, and it passed unanimously in both houses. Something tells me that one particular senator would not allow for the unanimous passing of anything pro-Asian or anti-Asian hate these days. But luckily, it was passed. But it wasn't passed or it wasn't passed, or it wasn't declared an annual thing, and it was just a week. And that it actually is the week, the first week of May. Some actually say that it's the first 10 days of May, and others said that it was the 7 day period between May 4th and May 10th. May 4th, because it commemorates the first Japanese American immigration. And May 10th, which is known as Golden Spike Day, is when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in Utah. And so those were sort of the 2 points that said that's why May was selected. And then later, they decided to make it a month, again, by Congressman Frank Horton. And then the first George Bush, H.W. Bush, made it annual. And so we've been celebrating APAM in its current state since 1992. Uh, but what is Asian American? So I asked Google because I didn't know. I said, Google, show me Asian Americans. They showed me a bunch of people who look like me and Hassan Minhaj. And I said, well, this is problematic because Asian America, as we know, Asia, as we know, is far more diverse than this. But even Google, and whether it is intentional or algorithmically, who knows? Asian American narratives are often shaped by people who look like me. And so, what are we going to do to dispel that? When we look at the population of Asian America, we are super duper diverse. The largest populations of Asian Americans are Chinese, Indian, Filipino. The smallest, some of them being Sri Lankan, Indonesian, Nepalese. There are about 23 million of us. And then the green bars in the bottom, it's a little hard to read, but those are your NHPI. And the census actually separates the two, and they have different offices and different people leading the community outreach for these two separate groups. And so even they see it differently. Um, but again, this is just show you how complex it is. This chart came out just last Thursday from Pew. They did population research on the Asian American community. The chart on the left will show you not only population by ethnicity, but also growth. There is not a negative number there. Our population continues to grow, has grown over the last 20 years. And according to their research and projections, we should be double our size in 40 years. That's also going to be because of our growth, our organic growth, people having babies, and then people continuing to move here. People move here for immigration. People move here as refugees. People move here as adoptees. Those are the three large migration patterns of why we come here. We also have to wonder what global events impact people moving to America. If you look at, we'll go over this when we talk about wealth disparity, but the richest Asians were all invited here by the US government to fill technologies and STEM jobs that America couldn't fill. The poorest Asians were here because of refugee settlement programs, most likely in cases where America got involved in foreign affairs that they should not have and decided to take in refugees to make some sort of wrong a right. Um, we don't think politically same either. We know that. We probably may have had debates or interesting conversations with our family members about who they voted for, who they weren't going to vote for. So this was a super, I guess, a hypothetical survey that they did back in October of last year. If the election were to happen today, who would you vote for? A third of Indian Americans said Joe, half said Donald. You have to understand that a lot of Asian Americans, especially the older ones, still view American politics and policy from the lens of the home country. I know my dad does, and we've been here 30 years. So, particularly from the Vietnamese perspective, if you understand the Vietnam War, if you understand the threat and the dangers of communism and what present danger they still perceive it to be in America's relationship and Vietnam's relationship to China, That makes a whole lot of sense. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you see a Trump parade in Little Saigon here in Orange County. Never makes sense. So let's talk about Asian American, the term, and the origin of the word. Born in 1968. Why? Because we wanted to show solidarity to Black brothers and sisters who are fighting for ethnic studies at a school here in California called San Francisco State. And so they gathered and they said, we need to show support. We want to march. If you watch videos of this, it's insane. They brought in riot police, they hosed people. It was an actual protest. They just didn't want to show up sign with multitudes of signs saying we're the Korean group this, we're the Chinese group this, and they said we need one single banner. They said, okay, we're going to be the Asian American Political Alliance, and that's the first time that is believed that word was used in the shadows of political activism, in the shadows of wanting to show solidarity for Black folks in this country. And so this might sound like I wrote it yesterday, but it was written back in 1969. And in the AAPA flyer, it says, we Asian Americans refuse to cooperate with white racism in this society. We support all oppressed peoples. We oppose the imperialistic policies being pursued by the American government. Was that written in 69 or was it written yesterday? Still true. Still very, very true. We have a lot of work to do. And as you can see, look at that cool guy with the sunglasses. This was back like 50 years ago, right? Still cool, but also standing next to other folks of color, really standing there in solidarity. Americans or Asians have been here since 1597, at the earliest or at the latest rather. In Filipino, Lusitano people sailed across the Pacific to land in what is now known to be Morro Bay in California, and we've been here ever since. We were also kicked out. We're the only people, Chinese people were the only nationalities to be excluded by nationality and ethnicity in 1882. Why? Because they thought we were going to come here and take all their jobs. And by then, the Transcontinental Railroad had been completed. So there was really there's no major infrastructure reason to bring in and employ tens of thousands of Chinese people. It is well documented that the Transcontinental Railroad was largely built on the backs of Chinese labor. But the photo that you see on the left is the official golden spike photo. When all the white people said, only white people in this photo, we're going to take the photo and make sure that kids who have textbooks later down the line only see this photo. And so what did their descendants do? They said, screw this, we're going to take our own photo. And so they got back together 145 years later in 2014 on May 10th and took the Chinese version of the photo. I had a friend who went to this. He's in here somewhere, and it's so cool. It was cool when he was sharing the story, live in the moment as he was going through it, and that is so cool. And we are also, and conditional Americans is something that we've often heard, particularly with the last presidential cycle and all that. But we really have been conditional because our loyalties are questioned quite a bit. Our allegiances are questioned all the time. And that, no better historical moment than to look at World War II and how Americans of Japanese descent were treated when more than 100,000 of them were quote unquote voluntarily put into internment camps, concentration camps, whatever you want to call them. Just terrible places where they rounded up people and said, you don't longer have a job. You no longer have money. You no longer have freedom in this country. You no longer have a house because we don't trust you. That's George Takei on the left. He's still alive with us today. He grew up in an internment camp. So this stuff isn't old. People who lived through it are still living with us. All the while so many women and men and young people were in these internment camps, greatest regimental combat team in the history of America itself was predominantly made of Japanese Americans. They volunteered to go fight for America against the Japanese while America put their Japanese families in camps. That in of itself should garner them awards. But they were put in the most dangerous missions because their lives were seen more disposable than their white counterparts. They died a lot, so they keep having to replenish the army. That's the only reason why they're known to be the most decorated combat team in history. It's fun to celebrate, but think about why so many medals were given. We don't even talk about this stuff. We don't even learn about this stuff. But if you're here with us today, and I'll probably remind you all at some point, June 3rd, the United States Postal Office is dropping a Go for Broke Forever stamp. So buy out your entire post office, have them confused, roll up, buy thousands of stamps, and get the post office, especially Mr. DeJoy, wondering why is America buying up all these Asian stamps. But do it because that's the only way we're going to prove to people in a capitalist society that we need to care about these things. There are books about these people. There are documentaries being made about these people. The three women who led the movement, who started 15 years ago to get the stamp, were widows of members of the Go for Broke team. Why would they go for broke? They had none to lose. They weren't humans back in their home country anyway. So they said, F it, let's just go. Only one of them remains today. And so, really excited, and hopefully she'll be healthy in a month when they have the commemoration ceremony to officially launch the stamp. Um, and again, something we didn't learn in school is the aftermath of the murder of Vincent Chin. So Vincent Chin was a Chinese American out to celebrate his own wedding in Detroit in 1982. Two white unemployed auto workers who were unemployed from the motor company saw Vincent out celebrating, blamed him, thinking he was Japanese or maybe they didn't care, and said, "You are the reason why we are unemployed. You, representing all of Japan's auto industry, are the reasons why we don't have a job." So they got into a fight. Story goes, he kicked their ass. Story goes, they came back and killed him. They went on trial. Actually, they never spent the night in jail. They went to trial. They were allowed to walk away with a $3,000 fine. They never paid it because they skipped town. And the judge said, "These are not the type of men you put in jail." Sounds a lot like the horse crap we hear today when we see accountability not being taken place. But this moment, almost 40 years ago, is what's really galvanized, or the first time that things were really galvanized, not just in the state of Michigan, but nationally, for Asian Americans to really stand up and fight for our accountability and our voice. And even though this fight's been going on for 40 years, our community is very complex because we have a constant influx of immigrants. We moved here in 1992 to a place called Fullerton, California, which statistically is the most Korean place outside of Korea. So my Asian American experience, or my first chapter of my Korean American experience, was very different. I didn't learn any of this stuff. My parents were busy trying to survive, and anything that wasn't specifically Korean wasn't really taught either. And to give you a little context of my first introduction to race in America, I moved here on January 11th of 1992. The LA riots where Koreatown burned at the hands of black and brown people in LA happened in April 29th of 1992. I was taught to be scared of black people. I was told to be scared of brown people, and I was told not to like them. I didn't really have a black friend until high school. I had to unlearn a whole lot of this stuff. And so, if you're hearing all this stuff and it's new to you and you're feeling weird about not having known it, it's not your fault. It's not your parents' fault. Blame the school system. Blame the people who chose what curriculum got to be taught and what not to be taught, and make a commitment that either we change the school system, and until we do, we keep having these conversations to teach each other and to teach our kids. We're also pretty cool, and we've done some stuff for America. We've brought American pride, medals, happiness. Astronaut Onizuka was the first Asian American to travel to space on behalf of America. Unfortunately, he perished in the Challenger mission, but he is very well celebrated. Vice President Harris, as we know, is of Indian and Black descent. Viet Thanh Nguyen, Pulitzer Prize winning Vietnamese refugee. How's that? Born in Vietnam, come here as a refugee. You grow up in the most impoverished of conditions, and you go on to master the English language so much that you not only become a professor of English literature, but you win the most coveted prize in American writing. I'm sure that makes some people mad. The man to his right, Sammy Lee, Dr. Sammy Lee, uh, vet, Army doctor, and two-time Olympic gold medalist in diving in 1948 and 1952. The first Asian American man to win it. Also in the same year, 1948, a woman won gold as well. And Sammy's story is really interesting if you have a chance to study it. He actually grew up in the Highland Park area of Los Angeles, and so his early stories are filled with being a Korean kid in LA when the racial policies back in the early 1900s was largely black and white. Really, really fascinating story. Um, Chloe Kim, we know Chloe Kim very well, continuing the tradition of Asian American Olympic excellence. A couple weeks ago, she wrote a really unfortunate, thoughtful piece in ESPN about how she fears going outside and how she is a victim of racism and then physical threats. If a U.S. gold medalist doesn't feel safe walking outside her house in Los Angeles, like, make sense of that. It doesn't. It doesn't make sense because again, nobody cares what you've done. It only care what you look like. And Heinz Ward, Super Bowl champion Heinz Ward from the Pittsburgh Steelers, our Korean mom, black father, still very involved and a very good member of the Asian American community. And then these three people who gave us so much joy 10 days ago, these people who could be my grandmother, who could be our sister, who could be our cousin, shining on the world's greatest stage, throwing shade left and right, not giving a crap, and just owning their space. So diverse in their talents and so diverse in the way that they represented Asians globally. And Yoon Yo-jung was 73 years old. She was born in 1974, 1947, 3 years before the Korean War. Her parents raised her through the war. She suffered through poverty, went through a whole bunch of crap to now finally be celebrated here in the States when she is 73. So that should be motivational inspiration, not just the Korean folks, but for anybody. It's never too late. Also, I did take a lot of joy in Americans finally thinking that they discovered a breakout star when I grew up watching her. Um, she's a pretty, if you watch like her Korean drama, she's pretty ruthless and pretty gangster. The amount of sass that she talked and threw shade at Brad Pitt on the stage is something that so many of us are very familiar with. But it was very nice to see her in a different role because, again, she looks like me. She looks like my mom. And so, so, so important. And so, in our last chapter here, let's talk about what this all means for us at school and as we go into work and all the crazy stuff that we have to deal with. While we are only 6% of the national population, Harvard says that we are about 12% of the professional workforce. In certain disciplines, that number is obviously higher. Medical, technology, finance. Law actually surprisingly very low. I know lawyer is a job that many Asian parents stereotypically want us to pursue, but only 2% of all lawyers in the country are Asian American or Asian. That has a lot to do with longevity, right? I don't know what the current numbers look like, but overall, very, very few Asian lawyers. And then the media like published crap like this in 1987, letting the world believe that we are whiz kids, that we are stereotypical model minorities. Who the heck had access to a personal computer in 1987? And how did they put this in front of this person who was supposed to represent all of Asian America? And and how did they find five East Asian kids and one Southeast Asian kid to represent all of us? Right? Again, this is so problematic. This really set the notion that we were the good minorities, that we earned our way here. But again, I tell you, most of these parents, most of these kids, their families, even a lot of our Indian friends were here at the request of the US government, at the invitation to come and study here, earn degrees here, and to fill the jobs that America couldn't fill. And even me personally, while I was in graduate school, told that I am not diversity because we're all smart and we're all rich. And we're not. Let's demystify and disaggregate some data, shall we? Overall in America, 32% of folks have college degrees. In certain Asian American ethnic groups, namely Indian and Chinese, we over exceed that quite a bit. But if we look to the right of the chart, and we'll see that Cambodians and Laotians actually far less. So again, ask yourself how they came here, when they came here, what access and what resources did they have to begin with, and what are we doing to make sure that they have equitable access. The types of jobs that we have also varies greatly. This is from the Urban Institute. And Asian Indians have a high percentage of management professional jobs, while some other Asian groups mainly have service-oriented jobs in the Vietnamese American community. Again, ask how, when, and why. Income, very, very wide. Asian Americans actually by race have the largest discrepancy or the difference between the top 10 percentile and the bottom 10 percentile of income and wealth of any racial group here in America. Poverty rates also vary greatly. 25% of Mongolian Americans live below the poverty line. But when we talk about public health care access, when we talk about immigration reform in this country, when we talk about resources, we don't think about Asians. And even when we do, it's not these groups that we often need the help the most. And so let's think about that, and let's continue to ask the tough questions of why, how, and under what context. This one's my favorite one to share. It's extra fun to share this in May, when so many white women share the graphic on the left and fight for pay equity, which I agree. We should fight for pay equity. It should not matter your gender. But there's a lot of problems with the chart on the left. A version of this gets shared a lot in March. Here's why. When they anchor it on white man making $1, this is median income. Here are the different racial groups of women who make certain amounts. White woman 79 cents, black 62, Hispanic Latino 54, Asian 90, native 57. And so the conversation really anchors on or focuses on what do we do to bring up the black and brown numbers to make sure that it's closer to the white and Asian. And because in this particular case, Asian women make more money as a median number, which we can argue if that's the right metric to use or not, um, we get left out of the conversation and we get gaslit. And we say, okay, y'all make more money than white people, so shut it down, right? Two problems with that. We still have to make up 10 cents, and that doesn't tell the whole story. So the chart on the right is the breakdown of that 90 cents. Certain Asian groups, Taiwanese, Indian, Malaysian, actually do make a lot more. But again, what kind of jobs do they have? How much money do they come here with? What is the entire context? And on the bottom, Burmese, Nepali, and Tongan women, very, very poor. Don't make a lot of money. I guarantee you that if we actually disaggregate the data of the black woman in here, of the Hispanic and Latino woman, and even the white woman, and thinking about where did they start from, on what is their actual background, and what part of the country they live in, we should be fighting for everybody. Bundling data, the dangers of a singular narrative, so bad and so toxic, and yet we use it to our advantage to paint the narratives that we want. So the next time you get shared this, or the next time you get told this stat or shown this chart, ask the follow-up questions. Why, how, and under what circumstances? There's a lot of stereotypes against Asian folks. There's a lot of cultural norms that actually make some of these stereotypes true. We don't fight back. Why? Many of our cultures are rooted in systemic respect. In the Korean language, there are different ways you talk to people, and you don't talk back. You don't dare talk back to people who are more senior than you. So, in the organizational context of schools, professors, bosses, managers, even partners, there's a lot of things that we need to unlearn. I share with you, I came here when I was 8, went through schools here, the best schools here in the States. I started my first big boy job at age 21 at an American home building company. It was a small team, and a 40 some odd year old white man was our division president. And as corporate America does, everybody's on a first name basis. It took me like 2 weeks to finally actually call him by his first name. I couldn't do it because for me, it was disrespectful. For me, it was you don't call somebody with that level of respect by his first name. Because think about it, everybody who had a status or a title up until that point was a Mr. or Mrs. something, was a principal something, was a professor something, was a doctor something. Up until academia, everybody has a title. And this person who had the highest rank in my team, I couldn't. And so I know what that feels like when you can't speak up, when you don't feel emboldened. And that's me, a big ass, loud Asian dude. And so if you don't have the privileges that I have, I can only empathize with you on how difficult it is to find your voice and to find the support. And so if you do have privilege like I do, if you have different privileges, it is your job and it is my job to speak up for people who don't. Instead, speak up for, not speak for. Clear the space and let them talk. Don't take credit for them. Don't mansplain. Don't gaslight. Just make space for those people. And so, um, yeah, Joe, I mean, I think it's so weird, right? Like it almost seems disrespectful, right? Because in some in our cultures, academia, teachers are supposed to be wise and never to be questioned. And you're like, wait a minute, why are you calling your mom by her first name? That's weird, dude. Because we've seen that. Or like, wait a minute, why you call him my dad by his first name? The hell's wrong with you? It's weird. My 4-year-old kid's friend calls me Jerry until his dad told him to call me Mr. Jerry. I was like, that's not much of an improvement, but I'll take it. Um, it's a complex infusion of cultures. Is one right or wrong? Both are true. Neither are true. Right? Think about this. What is domestic to me is somebody's foreign. As we look at each other today, what is the right side to me could be your left side. Somebody who was once a stranger could be your friend, your spouse, your partner. Everything changes and everything is full of perspective. And so it's different. And I'll end with this. These are microaggressions that I love/hate hearing because I've heard it so much. And so if you have heard these, I empathize with you. If you have said these, I forgive you. And if you have heard these being said to other people, please speak up the next time. And these are all rooted in really intention and intent, right? So sort of the tone that comes with these things. Because not, uh, specifically, I didn't. So where are you really from, right? I only get angry when I know that the tone is going where I think it's going. If somebody comes from a genuine place of curiosity of, hey, what is your cultural background? I want to learn. Like you can sense that, right? We all have that spidey sense. But if somebody initially meets you and says, hey, where are you from? And I say California, and they say, no, where are you really from? Then I know where they're trying to go. Right. And so, I often used to joke, like, because I was born in Korea, like that's where I get stuck because I don't want to lie to people. And so, because one of the variations of where you're really from is where were you born? And I really wish I could say LA to really mess with them a little bit more. But then I have to say Korea. And so they're like, aha, I knew it. And then they say something really offensive and totally unrelated, like, my cousin married a Vietnamese woman. And I'm like, and none of it makes sense. But it always happens. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, it might. I hope it doesn't, but it might. And so this is really in the other rising that our names are not legitimate enough, that our places of origin are not legitimate enough, that our names are too confusing to pronunciate. So either I'm going to shorten it, initialize it for you, or I'm just going to make up a fake name altogether and start just calling you Bob. We've all been through it. Yeah. What is your real name? I get angry at this stuff. Not to be outdone. We're not the only ones who get microaggressions thrown at. Here on the left, by one of my favorite Instagrammers named Oh Happy Danny, Danielle Cook brings us our favorite microaggression greeting cards. And so read them for yourself. Take him for what it's worth. Um, and it's just so bad and it's cringy and it's funny when we sit here amongst friends who see the world in similar ways. But these are said so often, many multiple times. I recently last week uh, made a LinkedIn post asking people to tell me their favorite/least favorite microaggressions. Had like 100 and something comments. Just went nuts. It's just everybody commiserating with each other, showing each other empathy and compassion. Um, yeah, it's and so we need to disassemble even some of the we talked about stereotypes earlier. We also need to unlearn and disassemble some of the stereotypes that we were raised to think with, that we thought at one point. I used to get really not angry but annoyed when people would think that I was Chinese. My last name Won is Won, and obviously there's a very common Chinese last name that is Wong that has a G at the end. And when people would mispronounce or misspell my name, I used to get really angry. I'm like, hey man, I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean. Get your country straight. And it wasn't until high school when I actually realized that I couldn't tell any of my Hispanic friends apart. That if you put many different people from Africa in a room and said guess the country, that I would get a zero. That built some empathy in me that I don't. It's not somebody's intention to mistakenly get my country wrong, and that in the grand scheme of things, from one human to another, that it really doesn't matter. And so you can teach people about your culture, but we're all going to make mistakes. But we should all think from a place of inclusivity and a place of compassion and empathy. And so Um, we're coming up on time, so I'm going to share with you just this one slide and also share with you some other resources. if you'd like, on things that I think you can do on your own time, or perhaps form a book club or keep each other accountable during the summer. The first is one you can watch. I do think that they're going to make this available for free all throughout the month of May, as PBS did last year, which is the Asian Americans documentary that's available to you on PBS. It's long; it's 5 hours, and it'll take you through, a good part. Again, not exhaustive or comprehensive by all means, but it'll take you through some good parts of Asian American history. Um, for folks going into the workplace, Stuck is a must read. It is by Margaret Chin, a sociologist professor at Hunter College in New York City. Why Asian Americans Don't Reach the Top of the Corporate Ladder. That's a very blunt and bold subtitle. So if that resonates with you, read Margaret's book. Jan Hyun wrote the classic The Bamboo Ceiling and Flex. She also talks about upward mobility, or the lack thereof, for Asian Americans in corporate America. And then if you want to do a little bit more training on uh, bystander and intervention, Hollaback is a great nonprofit that does a lot of training in that arena. And so I'm going to open up for questions. I'm going to show you my kids again, um, and share with you. Uh, oh yeah, follow my podcast. Um, I don't, we didn't talk about it yet, but um, yeah, Apple did some crazy stuff for me today, and I'm just like going crazy. I'm just going to share it because why not? I'm going to brag. All right, so go to Apple Podcast today. And while I do this, please think of questions to ask me. Okay. You guys see this? All right. So this is the main page of Apple Podcasts. In here, celebrating Asian American Heritage Month. Again, it's a different way of calling the month that we're in. They released this list called Never Voiceless. This is my show, and they decided to put this first. It's crazy. It's insane. Um, I'm freaking next to Margaret Cho. I know y'all don't maybe know Margaret Cho, but if you're old like me, you know Margaret Cho, and that's pretty dope. And so, look, I didn't get into my personal story so much. It's not about me. I would love to connect with all of you at different points, and perhaps share with you my personal story then. But um, I left the corporate system because I didn't feel like I could be me. I had my MBA. I worked at a strategy consulting firm. I went to WeWork, all these places and logos that some might call dream companies, dream schools, objective measures or markers of success in America. I walked away from all of it because I never felt like I could be me. And it coincided with the time where I became a father of two, right around the time Charlotte was born. But it didn't really matter how much money they offered or how prestigious the job was, or how fancy whatever any of that was. There's a specific moment where I decided that I needed to do something that I'd be really proud of. Um, I am stepping down shortly, but I currently serve on the board of a charter school out here in LA. It's an elementary school in South LA, predominantly Hispanic students. Um, and every year they have a thing called Inspire Week, where they invite professionals and adults to come and talk to little kids about students, about what they do, why they love what they do, and why young folks should aspire to be them one day. And so I was a strategy consultant at the time. I had been doing it for about a year. And, this is one of these like prestigious cush jobs that, MBA students like. And I'm sure a lot of you and whatnot want. So there I was, a year in, standing in front of a room when you could be in a classroom of 10-year-olds. I could not tell them what I did because you can't explain to 10-year-olds what consultants do. Could not tell them why I love doing it because I didn't. And I could not tell them why they should study their butts off and to do what I do. On the way home, I decided to quit. It took me actually 8 months to finally do it, but it was decided then that I should. And that just went down the path of what does authenticity mean for me? What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be Jerry? And what does it mean to be something that my parents, but also my kids and my future grandkids could be proud of? Because we can all make money. Money's not the goal. We can all get respect. Respect is not the goal. Legacy is the goal. Pride is the goal. Impact is the goal. And so there's a lot of ways to do it. I know I can't imagine the world you guys live in now. The amount of pressure that you get from seeing, celebratory messages on LinkedIn, fake lifestyles on Instagram, your parents still telling you the same BS that my parents told me 20 years ago, telling you to go do safe jobs. No jobs are safe. Anybody could fire you tomorrow, right? Um, nobody stays at a place for that long. So I know this conversation isn't about career, but well, we have some students in the room. Um, if there's anything that I can inspire you to think about and to do and to pursue, think about what it means to be you. Think about what you are sacrificing if you take a paycheck. Think about what you're sacrificing when you take an additional paycheck. Are you missing birthdays? Are you going to eventually miss weddings? And when you get to that point in your life where you have to think about your own kids, what are you sacrificing time with your kids for? A business trip? Conference call? Could be a lot. I don't know what financial state you guys are all in. You guys go to a very expensive school. I'm sure not everybody pays for all of it. I didn't pay for all of my school either. So I don't know what situations you guys are in. I don't know what financial situations that you're in charge of at home in support of your parents or other people. But there are different ways to make money. You just have to start early and to be dedicated to it. I started my podcast 15 months ago, but I started creating content more than almost 2 years ago. Y'all saw the Chewbacca, right? That was Halloween of 2019. I am launching uh so Dearest Americans uh is the official APAM content partner for a tiny little hamburger company called McDonald's this month. I don't do that for charity. That pays. I get to speak at large companies like Pepsi and Johnson, and those are not volunteer projects. So I get to create a very now a good life and hopefully a better life for my family, talking about being me, sharing all of our stories. Every week, twice a week, I get to ask people, tell me about your story. How did your family move here? And Apple put that on their front page today. So don't let anybody tell you that you have to work at a Google or a McKinsey to feel validated. And I know you guys are all East Coast snobs too. I've been one. And I know how much people care about where you went to school and where you live and all that stuff, right? But those people won't care about you. Those people won't be at your funeral. And so think about impact and think about legacy, right? So you can, and I am a living testament that you can live in authenticity and have that authenticity only after years of hard work really manifests itself in a really good life for all of you. And so, and if you're not ready to do me and do it my way and quit the corporate world and go down this path that was very, very challenging, lonely, and scary and frustrating at times, infuse what I do into what you want to do every day. Does not matter if you're a banker, does not if you're a matter consultant or a doctor or a lawyer. Fight for the people that you need to fight for. Infuse activism and advocacy into every breath that you take because we can't separate this. I wake up like this every day, and people are attacking people who look like me simply based on the way that I look. And so fight for the people. And I see we have a wide variety of people. I'm just going to talk to the Asian Americans here for a second because I've often lived most of my adult life thinking this. I don't care where you go to school. I don't care where you work. I don't care where you live, what private schools you send your kids to, what country club you belong to. We will never be white in this country. Ever. Doesn't matter who you marry. We will never be. We will always be othered. And this is not a depressive moment. This is just the truth. And so think about how you're going to be happy and successful as an Asian person, as an Asian American person in this country, and recreate the definitions of what the American dream means and create for yourself what the definitions of success and happiness means. Not your parents, not even mine. Make it your own. But don't chase somebody else's dream because it's never going to come true. I'll stop there. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. So I want to thank everyone who helped make this virtual celebration of APIDA Month happen. Jerry, thank you so much for engaging in conversation with our peers, Jin, and with all of us. And to the ASUE board and the Days-Massolo Center, thank you. Before we depart tonight, we'd like to call all in the community. We'd like to call all in the community in.
So ASU wrote a call to action statement. So it just says that we have a duty to acknowledge that violence of Asian Americans is indicative of a greater system that enacts racial violence and oppression upon other communities of color, and we call on our community to deepen our commitments and take these actions. I think Paula highlighted it. I don't know if she's putting it in the chat. So the first area of action would be support for APIDA students on campus, meaning making meaningful space for community and relationships that are healing and responsive for APIDA members of the community. And two, interrupt racism everywhere, deepening the commitment to anti-racist, justice-centered rhetoric, which actively includes the voices of minority voices in the classroom and outside of that, to build more meaningful and reciprocal relationships with the APIDA communities and APIDA-led organizations, and three, recommit to self-educating and to disrupting oppression on multiple levels. And then the final call to action would be make an increased commitment to transformative action and social change by utilizing the resources we have in collaboration with students and community to advance racial justice on all levels. So thanks everyone for coming. We hope this event has expanded individual perspectives and provided a space to learn. So thank you again for our talk with Jerry.
Wait, it's okay if you don't want to open up your cameras, but for those of you who want, can we take a Zoom fee? If you don't want to, or if you're in somewhere you don't want to, totally okay. And if you don't want to take a photo, that's also okay. Whoa. Hi, everybody. Alex, that's a cool mask.
Thank you. Yep.
And I hope maybe one of these days I will. Oh, fun fact, I've actually been to Hamilton. Junior year college tour, 1999. I went to high school in New York City, so we did a New York State college tour. I don't remember much of it, but I just know that I went. So maybe I'll go back. I think schools. I mean, maybe we'll be able to do this in person next year. All right, 1, 2, 3. All right, thanks everybody. I put my email. That's my personal email. You're more than welcome to keep in touch. Please let me know how life is going. If you need help with anything, Instagram and LinkedIn are two of the places where I try to stay as loud as I can. So please DM me, send me a note, add me there, and would love to continue this relationship with you all. Thank you for your invitation again. To Lily and to Jen and to Paula, you guys are wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.